Hello all, Rick here. In typical YouTuber attention-grabbing somber opening, this is a video that I kinda didn't want to have to make. But I actually got several requests over time asking for this topic, so here it is. View screens of Star Trek. There have been a lot of videos covering the view screens in their various forms over the years, and between them all there isn't really much to add. Wow, I'm really selling this video, aren't I? That being said, here's my take on a view screen lore video. So, the original view screens were simply windows, as early as the NX Phoenix and the Warp Delta test flyers. Any information required was displayed on nearby monitors with the occasional heads-up display projection. Communications at this time were entirely audio-based too. However, the very first starships into space, like those used by the Earth cargo services, featured the first proper view screens. The early Freedom class, the USS Franklin, featured a slightly more advanced window made from either transparent aluminum or duranium. There was a translucent overlay that could be projected onto the screen, which was used to show tactical information. However, the majority of information and communications were still done through smaller screens or audio communications. When it comes to the vessels that came between this and the NX class, we saw a more traditional view screen. This relied on the same principles as modern day technology, perhaps with a futuristic new display method, but were basically large TV screens with an obfuscated camera mounted nearby for visual communication. Ship-to-ship communications was now handled predominantly on this large screen at the front of the bridge. During the next steps of development for the now UFP Starfleet, many technologies were folded into the design of their new starships, and we get the first, kinda controversial, switch-up thanks to the placement of Starfleet bridges, which tended to be prominent, protruding from the hull. This is often seen as a holdover from the older ships that used windows as they needed a forward-facing viewport, even though with technology it was no longer required. Despite this, the placement of the bridge allowed for a large window that could display the views beyond. Notably, it was incredibly thick and not just glass, but still presented a potential weak point. However, considering the location of the bridge overall, I'd say anything that was going to break the windscreen was going to total the deck anyway. Then again, I'd also say every little helps. Either way, from the 2190s onwards, the earliest vessel we see is the Shenzhou, and this large window harkens back to the translucent heads-up displays being projected onto the view screen. The projectors are built into the frame itself and likely some form of holography at this juncture, as the same systems was repeated in numerous display panels across ships like the Crossfield class, leading to an abundance of translucent vertical screens covered in digital buttons. Around the mid-23rd century, someone must have agreed that at some point the bridge might actually need all the protection it can get, but was not willing to just bury it deeper in the vessel. So when the Constitution class was launched, it broke the mould in several places. Firstly, controls were more tactile and relied less on digital feedback for less instances of unresponsive interfaces. On the view screen front, however, things remained the same with an exception. The open viewport of the Constitution class could be closed up, and when it did, the window was shuttered and the view screen transferred into a functioning as a holographic screen. At least, that's the reason given for the distinct variations in bridge layouts we see between TOS and Strange New Worlds. Feel free to mention timelines. Point is, by the time of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701, holographic technology had reached a point where it could comfortably emulate a display effectively projecting onto a surface. Whether that was a specially made viewer or a transparent window into space is redundant. By default, the vessel would relay the image captured from external forward cameras, or if it was a window, nothing. As a spanner in the works, however, we did see the early implementation of attempts at holographic communications systems in 3D. However, these did not work out well, being prone to interference, unclear images, and on the Constitution class it led to a cascading power systems failure, so this was removed from subsequent designs until Starfleet would revisit this idea in the late 24th century. Things continued in much the same way over the next 100 years, with the biggest change being that Starfleet stopped building bridges with windows to space, instead utilising more of the deck space of Deck 1. This means that the primary view screens on ships like the Excelsior and Constellation classes were built into the wall now from the start, but the display was now a solid frame with a screen upon which flat holograms would be shown. It's not clear if these screens had any lenticular or depth to them, but we can assume that with iterations this design improved until we reach the early to mid 24th century. This is where the next notable advancement comes in: the false 3D effect. By the time of the Galaxy class development, 2353, view screens were basically relying on the same technology from the past century, but more refined. Now images that were projected onto its 2D screen appeared three-dimensional. Viewers from different angles would see an image displayed at corresponding angles, providing a compatible system was broadcasting the other end. When we see the development of the Intrepid class, we have the next advancement in tech. While the frame was still a solid object, built into the bridge wall, it now carried no physical screen. Instead, we can see that the wall immediately behind the area where the screen would be is a hologrid. This means that a screen made from matter was being substituted for by a complete hologram, including a force field on which to project it. When the main viewer was completely offline, you could view the bare holographic latticework, and when active, it retained the same 3D effect as prior models. This sort of completely holographic display continued on to the Sovereign class, where another advancement was made. This time there was not even a frame. Instead, hidden holoprojectors around the front of the bridge simply generated the entire screen, free-floating in the air millimeters from the bare bulkhead. So, this is the first time we see that the entire view screen is non-existent. It's all an illusion of photons and force fields. In 2372, Starfleet revisited the idea of holocomms, this time with a greater degree of success, albeit with a few limitations. Movement was restricted, but the image was perfectly clear and featured far less interference or distortion. Both these features would see intermittent implementation in ships throughout this era, however, and it strikes me as a bit of a fad. Something Starfleet did because they could and were excited at their new holographic tech. I say this because the Prometheus class, despite having many holoprojectors, did not use holocomms, and even the Sovereign class was refitted to have an actual framed view screen added back in. Perhaps this is the case of over-designing something then scaling it back. By the late 24th century, ships had started going with a wider array of designs pulled from across the eras. Some vessels, like the Sagan class, went back to featuring a full window onto which a screen could be projected. However, others, like the oft-maligned Inquiry class, did not actually feature a window module. Seriously, from the outside, this main bridge window does not exist. Therefore, the entire thing must be a holographic projection of a reused set. I mean, a projection made to resemble a window that's not actually there. That kind of makes sense though, and lines up with what we see on the Constitution 3 class. There is a continual projection in play, either within a frame or not, that resembles an expansive window to the view that would be present on the other side of the bulkhead. However, we see no saucer hull, and while the view changes angles depending on position, this is tech that has been common now for 50 years. The Neo-Constitution, however, could open its main bridge to space if needed for emergency evacuation or other purposes. But now I need to take a look at more models that supposedly feature a bridge window and see if they actually do, or if it's a hologram. In the far future, in the 31st century and onwards, view screens appear to still be entirely holographic, with place built into the bulkheads to display things. I am not sure they are actual windows, as we see a deactivated one with a series of bars and lights behind it, not open to space, like the Discovery era ships. I'm not counting the Crossfield refit Discovery A. Crossfit? As that was a unique overhaul of an older ship. However, the USS Athena did have such a window view screen in a recessed alcove over the atrium section. When it comes to communications, they are far more comfortable with holocoms by this era, with projectors appearing to be all over the vessel, and these holograms even can navigate and interact with other people in the space, which makes me question how this all works. I mean, I want to see a hologram call from both ends. Maybe the hologram simply wanders around without the host moving. But yeah, questions remain. And that covers the development of view screens. From big TVs that are little more than what we have now, to holographic overlays on windows, then moving on to fake windows that were screens, and then fake screens made entirely from holograms, and mixing all these around. Personally, I prefer the sort of mixture that we see on the Connie Mark III, where we get to have that grand and cinematic view of a window without it ever actually being there, as it's all a hologram projection. Cool beans. Thanks for viewing this very viewable video on Viewscreens. I've been Rick, and until the next one, goodbye.